In 180, the first version of the Apostles' Creed. Now, the Apostles' Creed did not get that name for about 200 more years, but this was the first iteration, came out about 180, where there was a profession of what we believe as Christians. Then, before 190, most of the books of the New Testament were recognized as being canonical, meaning being what we want to use for learning about our religion. Not all of them. There's a half a dozen of them that didn't get accepted for another 200 years, but most of the books had been accepted by the year 190. 196 was the Easter controversy. That was a big one. This was actually the beginning of the split between Eastern Orthodox and the Western Roman Church, which eventually we call the Roman Catholic Church. This didn't splinter them at that point, but it started. It just kind of cracked, because in the Easter controversy had to do as to where, based on the Jewish calendar, you were allowed to celebrate Easter. And they never did get together on it. As a matter of fact, they're still not. The Eastern Orthodox celebrates Easter in a different time frame than we do. And right or wrong, honestly, it doesn't really matter. We get to heaven either way. Okay. In the year 200, now I have in parentheses 200 to 1450, because in 200, that's when the barbarians started to come in to the West and started to pick away at the Roman Empire and break it up. So it took from 200, so it took over 1,200 years for the final demise of the Roman Empire. But this started in earnest around the year 200. Okay. 217 to 222, the Bishop of Rome. Now those numbers, the 217 to 222, those were the years that Callistus was the Bishop of Rome. Those are the years he served. And he was the first one to claim special authority as an heir of Peter. In 250, Emperor Decius, from 249 to 257, that's when he reigned, institutes the empire-wide persecution of Christians. Up until that time, the persecutions were localized. The Christians in Jerusalem were being attacked, or in Antioch, or in Rome. It wasn't the whole Roman Empire. Decius is the one that started the whole empire set of persecutions. Then at about 250, monasticism started. This is the hermits, okay? Not the Herman's hermits, but the hermits that started in Egypt. Then we have the first church building, St. Peter's Cave in Antioch. Now, originally it was just a cave. It wasn't a church building. So the church that started in Antioch with Peter and Paul was actually, I showed you pictures of a cave, and that's where they actually started the church. And then in about 261, they built an edifice in front of it, so you had the front of it that looked like the churches we're familiar with today. In 287, they had the mass conversion of Armenia to Christianity. And here for a question I was asked earlier, 295 is when the term Catholic was used by Ignatius to refer to the body of the church. 303 to 305, the era of martyrs. Now that doesn't mean this is the only time we had martyrdom going on. But this is where it was the harshest. Diocletian kicked it off throughout the empire, and we had just thousands of us that were Yes. Oh, Ignatius used it when if I remember, he wrote it in a letter referring to people as being Catholic. But Catholic, remember, the meaning of Catholic is universal. So he was talking about the whole body of Christians, and it's Catholic being universal. It's not, we think of it as the Roman Catholic Church, but Catholic has a meaning of universality, not anything directly for religion. It's not a religious term per se. It's been hijacked to be used as an identifier. Instead of just saying the Western Church or the Latin Church, which sometimes you'll see it referred to, versus the Eastern Church or the Eastern Orthodox, the term Roman Catholic has been picked up. And when we get to the part where the church actually splits, that's when they determined that the Western Church would use the term Catholic to identify themselves versus the Orthodox Church, which is, we call them today the Eastern Orthodox. But back then they called themselves just the Orthodox Church because they felt they had the orthodoxy behind them, where Rome was the heretics as they were leaving. Okay, that's fine. Hey, always check up on me, be a Berean, just check on me, right? I'm not offended, believe me. Okay, from 311 to 314, the Donatist schism happened in North Africa, and the Donatists wanted to not allow anyone that had given in to persecution back into the church. And others said, well, no, we need to let them back in. And that's what was causing that particular split. And that went on for that was big then, but it lasted for several hundred years. 312, the Battle of Milvian Bridge. This is where Constantine took out his competitor. And prior to the battle itself, he felt that he had had a vision, claiming himself and his army had seen this symbol above the sun. And he saw it again in a dream. And this is where he was told if he followed this, and he would use this sign, and he would conquer. So all of his soldiers, they painted it on their shields. They also had standards that they put up that had this at the top of it. It's called the Chi Rho monogram. And the first and last letter of Jesus in Greek is embedded in this symbol. So this is where I talked about the dream that he had. So they actually carried standards that looked like this into battle. And then in 1312, Constantine converted to Christianity. Now his conversion, I'm going to say it was tentative. He took on a lot of the thought processes and some of the belief systems that we had, but he wasn't fully converted at this point. Okay, he actually didn't get baptized until he was on his deathbed in the 30s, if I remember correctly. And part of that was by design. When we first started, it was believed that baptism cleaned off all sins. So if you waited till the last minute to get baptized, then all the sins that you had accumulated would be washed away, not just original sin. So if you got baptized and lived a life, you got rid of original sin, but then you collected all these other sins when you did bad things going through life. But if you could hold off on your baptism, then that was all washed away before he died and hopefully went to heaven. But that's, from my research, that's why he didn't act. So when they say he converted, he favored Christianity, but by our standards today, we wouldn't say he had converted as such. All right, that's the review. And other than doing a bad job with the term Catholic, if there are any other questions you want me to hit on before I move on to new stuff? No? Okay, you're taking it easy on me tonight. All right. Okay. Terms. General or ecumenical council mean the same thing. If you want to be fancy, you use ecumenical. But it's a worldwide assembly of bishops and authority in the church. It's from the Greek, oikoumene, for universal gathering of the church. And the purpose of these is to settle disputes, to address matters of faith and reform. So they operate about like our Congress does. They all get together, fight a lot, and get a little bit done. But that's what the design of these. These things really got started because of the heresies that were out there. Remember, we have the advantage today that we've got our Bibles. The Catholic Church has their catechism. Other churches, even within Calvary Chapel, we have books that talk about how we run our churches and what we look for in the churches. Our books are a lot smaller than all the other ones because we don't have a whole lot of rules. But they all have the rules. Back then, there were no rules. They didn't even have the New Testament to go to be able to see what was happening, because none of that had been written. They had the Old Testament scrolls where they could take from the Jewish laws and like that and bring them over, but they didn't have the structure. So when the heresy started out, people would say, well, why should I believe you and not believe you? So they started coming up with these councils to be able to get the people together to put together, how do you tell what is a heresy or what we call orthodox? What's the correct view to have? And remember, to be orthodox, people say, well, that means it's cast in stone. No, what orthodox means is you got the most votes. It's still, the orthodoxy is decided by humans. So that's why you'll see shifts. When we get further on and I start talking to you about Vatican I and then Vatican II, they changed the rules. In that in Vatican I, because you're not Catholic, you can't go to heaven. Done deal. Vatican II, now, because you're following religious practices that parallel Roman Catholicism and have a lot of the same ideas, now we're going to let you in heaven. Don't you feel blessed? So there are changes, but keep that in mind when you hear because a lot of people, again, when you hear the term orthodoxy, it's like, oh, that's the way it's got to be. Not necessarily, because orthodoxy is by vote, and that's what these councils did. Now, through time, we've had many of these. The Roman Catholics recognize 21 ecumenical councils that have happened over the years. The Eastern Orthodox only officially recognized 7. Happens to be the first 7. After that, they said no, because after the first 7, we stopped inviting them. So it was just the Western churches that got together. So the Eastern Orthodox, we're not going to abide by those. Okay, first one was in Nicaea in 325. Constantinople 1 at 381. Ephesus in 431. Chalcedon in 451, Constantinople II in 553, and Constantinople III, 680 to 681, and Nicaea II, 787. We'll get to the other 14 as we go along. But these are the 7 that basically everyone agrees on that shaped the church. Yes.
So the point of them getting together is to like put in laws?
Yes. The question is, the point of this is to put in laws. It's to put in laws, it's to put in practices, it's to look at the heresies and decide which ones aren't heresies, or that this is really what we should believe. We'll get to it in a few minutes. We'll talk about the Nicene Creed, and that talks about this is what you should believe. Then when you have the Arian conflict or controversy and all of those, and different councils worked on different issues. I'm not going to do it tonight, but in our next meeting, I'm going to go through several, if not all of I'll probably just do several of them because 21's a lot to go through at one sitting, and talk about what the major themes that they were talking about, what came out of them and got to get implemented. They line up biblically from the perspective of how the biblical concepts were interpreted by the people of the time. No, God was there influencing without a doubt, but he didn't have a seat at the table per se. So you had the people who were in charge, and by the time any of these happened, all of the apostles were already all gone. So these people were all, shall we say, second and third generation Christians. And most of them didn't have a Jewish background either. So, it's like all new territory. Kind of like when we built the United States back in the day. We had some stuff from England, we had some stuff from France, we had some stuff from Italy, and we put it together and we came out with, yeah, that's right. So, but that's what makes it fun. Synod. Now you'll see this word come up. Synod is another council, but it's smaller. The ecumenical councils, they sent out invitations to the entire Christian world to get bishops to come in. Remember, bishops were the leaders of the individual towns or precincts that they were working. Excuse me. So synods were like maybe a city, maybe a small area that may have had 4 or 5 different cities, but they worked together, and they wanted to get together and say, hey, we want to run our churches like this. So they'd call a synod, and they would get together and come up with some rules. Now, a creed is a formal statement of what you believe, the fundamentals of, and it's generally when you say creed, other than the music group, it has to do with religious orientation, okay? But you hear creeds, the Boy Scout creed, the 3 fingers and all of that. But it can be a philosophy, a personal set of beliefs. You can have your own creed. What are your beliefs and what are you going to follow? So when you hear the term creed, it's a formalized statement, and they'll say authorized, that somebody signed off on it, that it's okay. When we talk about the Nicea Creed, that went through several iterations over the years, several different ways. We'll come across the term codex. Basically, a codex is a book. Prior to the codexes, or codices in plural, everything was on a scroll. So they would have these big tubes of papyrus and paper that were all strung together, and they'd have to have one guy on one end unrolling, another guy at the other end rolling it up. When they developed the codices, they were using paper, and they would bind them like we do today. And a lot of the stuff, a lot of the things that we have found from ancient time were actually torn out of codices, because anything older than that, for the most part, didn't make it. Apollinarianism is a belief that Jesus had no human mind. Named after Apollinaris, who was an early proponent of the thought that he had the mind of God, but he didn't have a human mind. Now, the First Council of Constantinople condemned Apollinarianism. So there's an example where they condemned a heresy, although it did not stop the movement. Remember, keep in mind, just because, kind of like here in the States, just because Congress says, doesn't mean everybody follows those statements. Sorry, I didn't mean to just look at you, but I was thinking. Theotokos, Greek meaning God-bearer. Many Christians called Jesus' mother Theotokos. But the problem with it is, as it was being used in this term, what they were calling her is the godmother, or the mother of God, indicating that God is God the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. She was the mother of. That's why in some areas she is adored at a level equal to and sometimes above Jesus. As a matter of fact, it isn't. The Pope several months ago came out with an edict to let all the Catholics know that the only one who you need for salvation is Jesus, not Mary. Okay, so obviously he must have viewed it as an issue to have to come out formally and remind everyone that salvation is through Christ, not through his mother. And Nestorius fought this term because, again, she had a baby that was both God and human. And that's been a lot of the heresies blend those two. Not God, just human. No human, just God. Sometimes God, sometimes human. And it gets confusing, to say the least. So Nestorianism, the belief that Jesus has two separate persons, one human and one divine. Well, no, it's all together. So, named after Nestorius. But unfortunately, this really wasn't his teaching. He fought it, but somehow he got tied to it. This view is more properly termed hyper-diophysticism, or beyond two natures. Say that 3 times fast. Monophysitism, from the Greek monophysis, which means one nature. The belief that Jesus' divine nature fully absorbed his human nature. And I'm going to hurt myself trying to say this word. Also called Eutychianism. Okay, some important people. Pelagius, died in 420, was a monk who taught humans have a natural ability to please God. There's a lot of people working outside their natural ability, huh? This thought was denounced by the local council in Carthage and by the Council of Ephesus. Theodore of Matsuetia, theologian from Antioch, who held the Nestorian views. His writings were included in the 3 chapters. Now, as I go through some of these people, if you want some other information about them, that's what the white cards are for. You know, I didn't want to get too deep in the weeds on some of these guys because, quite frankly, a lot of these guys I've never heard of until I got to researching them. So if you see a name up there that you want some more information, this next guy, Augustine of Hippo, probably one of the most important theologians ever. I know it says up there in his era, but his theology shaped the Western religious practices. Between him and Thomas Aquinas and there's a few others that have had major influence far beyond or a little bit I'm giving them here. So if you want more information on it, let me know. I'll do some of the research and present it further on down the road. Okay, John Chrysostom was a church father, generally known as the greatest preacher in Christian history. I referred to him earlier, like our second meeting or so. He was nicknamed Golden Mouthed for his eloquence. Now, keep in mind, unless I say otherwise, usually when I'm showing you the dates, that's the dates when they were serving in their capacity that they made the name for themselves. He was the Archbishop of Constantinople. And for those of you that might be history buffs, remember Constantinople was originally called Byzantium. So if you hear that name, you'll know it's the same city. Here's another one that's pretty important, especially in Catholicism, Benedict of Nursia. He's the father of Western monasticism, monasteries, the monks. Those of you that have Catholic backgrounds or Catholic friends, you'll hear about the Benedictines. That's from this man. He wrote the book, The Rule of Benedict, and this is what fashioned most of the monasteries as they developed throughout Europe, and even when they came over here to the United States. They followed this manual because what it did is it divided the workday for the monks. They spent time in prayer, time working, time in prayer, time in civic duties, so it actually gave them structure versus, or in contrast to the hermits who didn't have any structure in their day. It was basically get away from society, hide from society, spend your day praying, and hopefully somebody will bring you some food, and you might go out and do your own little gardening, but there was no structure in their day, where in the monks there were. He founded religious communities near Monte Cassino in Italy with his sister Scholastica. Oh, I thought I included that. Let's just say no, Scholastica. She actually went out and set up convents, or as the book I was reading called them nunneries. I always found that a funny word. But so while he's setting up monasteries, which are male only, his sister established a few convents for women only. I'm sorry? Oh yes, that's really her name. And actually, if you guys were Catholic, it'd be Saint Scholastica, as Saint Benedict. I've not put saints on all the names. Most of these people I'm bringing up have been sainted by the Catholic Church. Columba was an Irish missionary, founder of the Ionia Monastery. Now, he was Irish, but he ministered to the Scots. Iona is an island off of Scotland. Gregory. He was the first Roman bishop to attain the status that would later be called Pope. Although they've gone back and looked at all the people that were bishops of Rome, and so he actually ranks as the 64th Pope for Roman Catholics. Now Gregory, and whoops, I didn't, there we go. Gregory had a lot of influence. He influences us today. Anybody have a clue how? You know the name of the calendar that we use? It's called the Gregorian calendar. He's the one that developed the calendar as we use it today, with January where it is and so on. Because if you think about it, October, the name October, oct means what? 8. But wait a minute, it's the 10th month. In the old Julian calendar, October was the 8th month, but when Gregory shifted it, we ended up with October as the 10th month, and all the months changed positions. Most of us have heard of Gregorian chants. He's responsible for the beginning of the Gregorian chants. Augustine of Canterbury. This is not the same Augustine I talked about a little bit ago. Okay, that was Augustine of Hippo, which was in North Africa. Augustine of Canterbury was sent to England to evangelize the church, or to evangelize England and to rebuild the damages that had been done there from the previous missionaries. Okay, some key events. The Edict of Milan. Emperors Constantine and Licinius affirmed, and that's important, affirmed Galerius' decision to legalize Christianity, ending the persecution of Christians. Constantine's the one that gets all the credit for this. He didn't do it alone. In 315, Eusebius becomes a bishop of Caesarea. Okay? And he writes the first history of the church. Eusebius was the most important in this particular era of historical writings, because a lot of stuff that we know about the early church came from Eusebius. There's a couple other people that were involved in, at different eras that get combined that I'll talk about another time. 320, the first church of St. Peter's in Rome. Wait a minute, I just said St. Peter's was the first one in Antioch. That's right, in Antioch. But this is when the first St. Peter's church was built in Rome, which is still there. And remember last time we spoke that the Roman Empire had been broken up into a tetrarchy. They have 4 rulers, 2 emperors and 2 Caesars. Well, now in 324, Constantine finally consolidates everything, and he becomes the sole ruler of the Roman Empire. The Council of Nicaea, the first one. It's actually the second one. The first one was held in Jerusalem when they were deciding whether or not new Christians had to be circumcised, had to become Judaized to be able to become Christian and be saved. So that was really the first council that had a major impact on the religion. But now the Council of Nicaea, Constantine called this, and invited all the overseers, or all the bishops. Remember, overseer and bishops are the same term. And they were dealing primarily with the Arian heresy. Later, this council was recognized as the first general council of the church. A couple key things that came out of it. This is a picture of one of the documents that came out. You can read ancient Latin. Good luck. The Creed of Nicaea confessed the church's belief in the Trinity and the full deity of Jesus Christ, that he is fully God, fully man. In 325, Ascom, which is now makes Christianity the state religion. Remember back then, Christianity wasn't looked at very well in most areas, but in Ethiopia and a lot of the African states, it was. In 326, the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem was built. Remember, this was done by now I've lost his name, Helena, who was Constantine's mother. And she built this church. This church is still in existence with 3 or 4 other churches built on top of it. But it's still, you can still visit it if you take trips through the Holy Land. 328 to 373. During this time, we had 27 books of the New Testament were recognized. (320 to 381), the Arian controversy. The heresy remained popular into the late 300s and 381. But even after it got dismembered through Nicaea, it still hung on for several years. In 350, Arians actually outnumbered Christians in many areas of the empire. So we've been fighting for our lives since the inception of Christianity. 328, 330, Constantine moves the capital of the Roman Empire to Byzantium and renames it, oh, surprise, after himself, Constantinople. In about 350, Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus were written. Remember, codexes are books. And these are the ancient writings that have been used to decipher what was being believed back then. And next, okay. 328, 373, Bishop Athanasius of Alexandria was a big defender of the Nicene Creed. Just because the Nicene Creed was adopted at the council, not everybody accepted it. So people had to defend it, both at the council and afterwards, to get people to actually adopt it. You know, a lot of times we get the impression that somebody says, do, and everybody follows in and does it. They've been human all this time. Not everybody follows. Everybody's got their own drummer they've got to walk to. So, problems all along. It's in our nature. 341 to 383, Ulfas, Bishop of the Goths, first to convert Germans on a large scale and translated the Bible into Gothic. Later, in the 1500s, Martin Luther would have a price on his head for doing the same thing of translating the Vulgate from Latin into German for the common people. I'm sorry?
Goth is a place?
It was a geographic location, yes. It's is what we would call today, it's in Germany. Okay. 361, 363, those years, Julian, he's the last non-Christian emperor. that didn't always help us, that they were Christian. Didn't always help us, but it wasn't as deadly for us. 378, Valiant dies at the Battle of Adrianople against the Goths. It's not just a look, it is an actual people. Leading the this is where the military decline of the Roman Empire, this is what they point to as the start of the fall of the Roman Empire. Okay, 363, we have the Council of Laodicea. Basil the Great became the bishop of Caesarea. And around 390, Ninian evangelizes the Picts, which is a group of people in Scotland. So we were spreading out all over the place and sending people out already. You know, a lot of the, I remember as I was growing up, it always seemed like everything only happened around Rome. All this stuff is going on, and you'll find out later that there was a push with Christianity ending up in Asia long before any of the Christians at the time realized it. So from 396 to 430, Augustine, Bishop of Hippo, that's the first Augustine I talked about a few minutes ago. Anathansis, his Easter letter in AD 367. It was sent to members of his church, and he listed what were considered the authoritative Christian writings of the time. So he had most of the books that we have today in our Bible were listed in this. And his letter contained 27 books that comprise today's New Testament. Now, he wrote that to the churches that reported to him. Those were not all accepted by the church in general till they had another council and voted on which ones they could use or which ones they would keep. 379 to 395, Emperor Theodosius made Christian beliefs an imperial command. Just to give you an idea, by 380, rewards for Christians had given way to penalties for non-Christians. Up until this time, the Romans were actually paying bounties on Christians. In that year, the Emperor Theodosius made a belief in Christianity a matter of imperial command. This is the command. It is our will that all people that we rule shall practice that religion which the divine Peter the Apostle transmitted to the Romans. We shall believe in the single deity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, under the concept of equal majesty of the Holy Trinity. We command that those persons who follow this rule shall embrace the name of Catholic Christian. However, judged demented and insane shall sustain the infamy of heretical dogmas, and their meeting places shall not receive the name of churches, and they shall be smitten first by divine vengeance, and secondly by the retribution of our own initiative, which we shall assume in accordance with divine judgment. And that was from a Roman emperor. Okay. In 381, the First Council of Constantinople settles the Nicene Creed and the Arian controversy. So the Nicene Creed was written in what? Was it 325? And here it is 60 years later almost, before it's finally given the heidi-ho and everyone can follow it. So that's the way a lot of these edicts work. Okay, on to 381, First Council of Constantinople. Emperor Theodosius declared Christianity the official religion of the empire. And I just read the edict that he wrote to put that in place. 431, the Council of Ephesus. On 382, Pope Damasus lists the canonical books of the Old and New Testaments. Whoops. So now the list of the books of the Bible have gotten the blessing of the Pope, the current Pope. Okay, 386, Jerome settles in Bethlehem, translates most of the Bible into Latin. It's and the first version of it's called Vulgate. It was called Vulgate because people didn't like it. They thought Vulgate means vulgar. They thought it was written too common, that it should have had more oomph to it. Good term. (347 to 404), Paula, a wealthy Roman widow, met Jerome, and after that meeting, she committed herself to Christ. And in that process, she gave up her 5 kids, renounced her lifestyle to tour the Holy Land. I wonder if the 5 kids were the reason I shouldn't go there, huh? But she financed and directed the construction of a monastery and 3 convents. She studied Hebrew with Jerome, and part of Jerome's assignment for rewriting the Bible, or the New Testament, into Latin, is most people didn't read Hebrew anymore because they weren't Jewish. They didn't have a Jewish background. But there's a long story about how he went through and learned Hebrew and then turned around and wrote the Vulgate. Because of her support, Jerome was able to do his job. And in the year 400, his Vulgate was published. Now, the Vulgate is what the Catholic Bible is based on. That's part of when we get to the Bible studies, you'll see that a lot of the controversy and the butting heads between us and the Roman Catholics have to do with what we use, which Bibles we use to study from, and there are differences in them. Come in. Okay. The Latin Vulgate version, it gives you a picture of what it looks like. Again, this is all handwritten. This is how confusing the world back then got. In 390, Ambrose, who was a bishop, excommunicates the emperor. The emperor that just said we're going to have Christianity as our state religion. There was a massacre in Thessalonica. Theodosius was blamed for it. So he got excommunicated. So what happens with that? 391, he makes it the official religion of the empire. What a punishment, huh? (397) The Synod of Carthage. Remember, that's the small grouping. Confirmed Athanasius' list. That's the list of the books that we should have in the Bible. And beginning in between 400 and 600, new hairdo hit the street. Monks and priests started to shave their crowns. If those of you that watch the old Robin Hood movies, they always show Friar Tuck with the top of his head shaved. This was actually part of their taking of their vows back then. And this rite was known as tonsure. So that was a big deal. You get to take your vows as a priest or as a monk, shave the top of your head so you just have the ring so you can't tell when you go bald like me. And it's a big deal. But all good things must come to an end. And in 1972, the Pope abolished the practice. So they don't go around shaving their heads anymore. In 400, not only did we get the Vulgate, but the Ethiopic Bible of Peshitta in Syriac was printed. Or, no, I'm sorry, not printed. Printing press doesn't come for another 1,000 years. It was handwritten. In 406, we get the Armenian Bible. Again, there were a lot of Bibles being translated out there at this time. And then in 406 to 410, the Germans break through, meaning they break through the outer defenses of the Roman Empire, and they start to tear up Rome. And with that, we'll stop for this week, and we'll carry on in 2 more weeks. God willing, because you know I've missed so many. I'm sorry. So, okay. So let's pray us out real quick. Father God, thank you so much for putting us together tonight to have this session again to learn more about the history of your church, and that those of us that are here or safely here, most of us are well, and we ask that you get us home safely so that we can continue learning and growing closer to you. Thank you so much for the blessings. Thank you for guiding me this week, that I was able to get caught up on how far behind I had gotten. And please protect everybody on the way home. And thank you very much. In Jesus' name, amen.